The main reason for buying an entry-level model of a muscle car is to still get the cool looks of the V8 version with a more manageable amount of power and still having that fun-to-drive factor. So I'm here with the 2016 Dodge Challenger V6 to see if it can live up to those expectations. One thing they really got right with the Challenger was the style, and that's an important part of having a muscle car. So it has kind of a retro design, but it still has some modern elements with the LED lighting and the 18-inch alloy wheels, but it blends well with those kind of classic retro cues like the hood scoop, the chrome fuel door, and the very flat deck lid. So I think they really nailed the design of this car. Here we are on the inside of the Challenger, and it's kind of a mixed bag, really. There's some elements to it that I really like, and then there's some other elements that are very, very annoying. So let's start off with the good stuff, shall we? Here in the instrument cluster, they've got some analog gauges that are kind of reminiscent of like the older Challengers from the 70s. Looks really, really good. I like that a lot. And then in between the two gauge pads, you have an LCD screen, and there's a lot of customization you can do with it. So it's nice that they allow you to kind of personalize the car in that regard. In the center of the dash here, you've got a very small touchscreen, and it works pretty well in tandem with the physical controls you have down lower on the dashboard, but they have a larger touchscreen available on this car, and it's a much better system. So first of all, they don't even redesign the trim piece here on the dash. They still have the cutout for the 8-inch touchscreen that you can get, and they just filled that void with a black plastic panel. So it looks a little cheap, and everything on the screen just feels very crammed together, and there's kind of a lot of menus to go through to get to some of the settings because there isn't a whole lot of space. There's also no backup camera, and with the visibility being as bad as it is in this car, especially out of the back, I really wish it had a backup camera on here so you could better judge where the end of the car is when you're backing up. They do, however, give you push-button start as standard, so I like that. And the center console, they did a really good job on. So it has the same brushed metal look plastic material as higher up on the dash. It is plastic, but it looks pretty convincing, so I really can't complain too much. And then on the physical controls down here, you've got some gloss black trim, and it looks really nice. I think they've done a good job with that, and the buttons and knobs all have a pretty good quality feel to them. And then on the shifter, it looks like one of those electronic shifters that you just bump back and forth, but it actually slides and locks into place like a normal automatic shifter would. And the way it's designed, it's very, very comfortable to rest your hand on. So I like how they've done that. Now you do get two cup holders here, and you've got a padded armrest here in the center. And if we open it up, it's a pretty deep center console. You've also got some various inputs there for the audio system. There's an aux input, there's a USB input, and there's also an SD card slot there, and it does have a power outlet. So if you wanted to plug a device in, you can just toss it in the console and it's out of the way. However, there are some areas of the interior that I think they really could have improved on. So, for starters here, over on the door panel, the door handle itself is located pretty far down, and just the way I sit in this car, I'm constantly reaching around my own leg to open the door, and it's just kind of annoying. It's not very logical, and it's just kind of tucked back down in there, so that's kind of an annoying thing. Also, the steering wheel is very oversized, and it's very large, and I just don't feel as in control as I would like. A smaller steering wheel would probably do just fine. I also think the seat fabric could be a little bit softer. It just doesn't have a very high quality feel, and the pattern itself is kind of lame, really. It reminds me a lot of the PT Cruiser from about 10 years ago. I also think there could be a little bit more space here in the back for such a big car. The headroom is fine, really. It's the legroom that seems to be kind of more of an issue back there. What really matters in a car like this, though, is the engine and the driving experience. So now we're behind the wheel of the Challenger, and let's take a look and see what it will do. So we're on kind of this curvy back road now, and it's got some hills and whatnot, so we'll give this a good chance to test out the handling of this car. So I want to turn in now, and immediately you notice it's got some body roll. It just doesn't feel very stable going around corners. It kind of rolls around, and it just doesn't feel very inspiring. The tires grip pretty well, but apart from that, it just feels kind of lazy. It doesn't feel very eager. Under the hood of this Challenger, we have a 3.6 liter V6, making about 305 horsepower. It's paired to an 8-speed automatic transmission. It's a ZF design, but it's actually made by Chrysler. So hopefully it'll let us get the most out of that V6. So you can light up the tires pretty easily, and with the traction control in sport mode, you can kick out the back end a little bit. So if you really put your foot into it, it can be a decent amount of fun. But then as soon as you get to a corner, the size and the weight of this car really start to become more noticeable as it just kind of understeers into the corner, and there's some body roll. It just doesn't feel that inspiring unless you're going in a straight line. But if you buy a V6 Challenger, you're of course not going to be pushing it hard all the time. Probably most of what you'll be doing is just driving normally. And for that, the Challenger is pretty good. So the ride is a little bouncy, but it's not as bad as I was honestly expecting. And it's pretty quiet in here. So if you're going to be using this car as kind of a long-distance cruiser, you'll probably be pretty happy with it. However, this thing is huge, and the visibility is pretty poor. Out of the front, it's okay. The hood is high, so it's kind of hard to see where the end of the car is. But the A-pillars are pretty thin, so you can honestly see out of the front decently well. But where it really becomes a problem is the sides and the back of the car. The rear window is pretty high up, and it's hard to see where the end of the car is, especially without having a backup camera. And the D-pillars are incredibly huge, so it's almost impossible to see out of the back of this thing when you're backing out of parking lots and whatnot. And the mirrors are pretty small, so that really doesn't help at all. As you can see, the Challenger is a pretty decent car. It does some things pretty well, and it does some things pretty poorly. And then, most of the time, it's just a very average car for what it is. And honestly, if you're thinking about buying a V6 Challenger, I would really recommend you go check out other vehicles as well. The Mustang EcoBoost is another great option. It doesn't feel as big and heavy as this car. It's a little bit more athletic, and the interior on that just has a much sportier feel. The Camaro was just redesigned, and it's been pretty good so far. So I would certainly check that out as well. It's got a very modern and sporty design, and once again, it's probably a little bit more athletic than this car, having less weight on it. But what I would honestly recommend you go out and take a look at least is the Honda Accord V6 Coupe. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying that because it's not rear-wheel drive, it's not a muscle car. The Accord is a couple $1,000s more expensive, but when you're looking at a car that's $27,000, $28,000, that's really not a whole lot more. And you just get a lot more for your money. You get a backup camera, you get a blind spot camera on the passenger side. It has leather seats, it has almost as much power, not quite as much, but it's quicker, surprisingly. It's a few tenths of a second quicker 0 to 60 out of a car that has less power and a 6-speed transmission instead of an 8-speed. And the whole package just feels so much more connected, and you just feel much more involved as a driver. So if you're really looking for enjoyment out of a vehicle, you should probably look elsewhere. But if you just want a Challenger because, hey, they look cool, and maybe you had one back in the day and you want another one, but you don't want all the power of the V8, this is a perfectly fine car for just tooling around town in.